Today I'm lucky to be joined by 4 leading industry professionals to discuss the value of real estate. Our cities and the inhabitants that live in them are no doubt changing very rapidly. So today our panel is going to be sharing some factors affecting the value curve shift in real estate, as well as what design can do to add value. We'll try to save as much time for Q&A at the end, so if any questions do pop up, just feel free to raise your hand at the end and share. We'll come to all of that. So as I said, I am Melissa. I am from ePorta. Rather than introduce the panelists, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about what you do, starting with Dara.
Hi, my name is Dara Huang. I'm the founder of Design House Liberty. We are an architecture and design practice, which includes interiors. And we're based in Clerkenwell in London, and we have an office in Hong Kong, if you're ever in that part of the world. That's pretty much it.
Petra.
Hi, my name is Petra Arko. I am a founder of Bergman and Ma, and we are an interior design practice specializing in FF&E and working all across London's developments. We're based in Soho. We're a team of 6, and we've been going for about 3.5 years now.
Hi, I'm Rory Cramer. I'm co-founder of Home Views. We're the TripAdvisor for residential developments. So we have about 900 developments listed in the UK with 8,000 resident reviews. So you can really read what people really think about the buildings that they've bought off plan or have lived in over the last 20 years.
Hi, I'm Nicolas Roux. I'm the founder of Rive Gauche. We're based in Holborn. We're mainly an interior design practice. We mainly focus on iron resi and hotel project as well.
Great. Okay, so let's kick it off. So as I mentioned, our cities are changing. The people who live in those cities are changing too. Starting with Petra, what changes do you think are having the biggest impact on property, and what can real estate do to keep up?
I think we've seen a huge shift in the designs we deliver to our clients, developers. And the main shift is that in the past, there was almost like a recipe that you could follow in terms of floor plan and in terms of design, and you would go in and furnish the space with it. Whilst now the clients are looking far more for bespoke design that addresses their needs and their wants, and it very much needs to be tailored to each developer or each private client, and the whole design process is a lot more creative, and it needs to look more into depth of the project and service the clients in a more wholesome way.
And I guess, Nicolas, you kind of talked to me about this global citizen idea, and how do you think the way that people are actually living is affecting that as well?
Yes, I think most of our clients are now living in lots of different cities in the world, so they might spend a month in London, a month in the States. So convenience is an important factor. So those properties need to make sure they are fitting their lifestyle. So for sure, they need to be much more bespoke to the way they live. And as opposed to just being the property, I think the service as well attached to those properties that will be able to help them on their lifestyle are very, very important as well.
I think it's an just to say that London is way behind most other global cities in this. If you go to the States or in Asia, 70% of people rent, 30% of people own from the majority of their life. And when you rent, your lifestyle's more about services and convenience. When you own, you have other aspects that come into play. And I think that's filtering through on the design side, from the architecture of the building to the interior design of the flat. But I think we're only just catching up with a lot of global cities. You probably see that all the time, Dara.
Kind of building on that, Rory, your platform, as you mentioned, is a way that sort of urbanites can leave feedback on properties that they've lived in. What are the most common need-to-haves that you're actually seeing that developers can then put into their properties to become successful?
Well, the most common, there's 2 aspects. I mean, we ask 5 key categories. So you rate the design, location, value, and management and the facilities of the building. And then we ask questions like, share one thing or more you wish you'd known before you'd moved in, or what aspect of your apartment do you like the most. So we create a lot of qualitative data that we then drill into. So I think from the design aspect, it goes back to what you've just said, it's the basics, storage in new build developments in London. If you really live in that flat, there's never enough place to put your golf clubs, your surfboard, and if you have kids in these flats, it's also a nightmare. So there's the practicality of life in new build, which I think, that goes back to a good designer and actually thinking about how someone lives in their home. And I think a lot of house builders in the UK haven't been doing that. It's just about efficiency and square footage. But the main aspects actually is community. So creating a LinkedIn community within a building, facilities that people actually use. So I think most people now sign up to a gym or a cycle class or a yoga studio. They don't want a gym in the basement that's windowless that never gets used. And the management of the building. So often in a build-to-rent building, so that's perpetually let, you have one landlord that has an interest in that building being well managed for the next 10 decades, in theory. With build-to-sell, often the developer builds a building, sells it off-plan and moves on, and there isn't that continuity. And I think that people, that really comes through, is having your building being looked after well, having a front of house that greets you by your name, knows your family, knows your friends. That's and it all comes back, I think, to community and to long-term management of a building.
And this is actually something that, Dara, you and I have talked about a little bit before, and the difference in Asia is sort of, and you've spoken to me about this before, is that in Asia you see a lot of sort of these big skyscrapers that are multi-use buildings. And would you say that that is the future in London as well?
No. In short. I don't think that the future of London is vertical.
Oh, there we go.
That's controversial.
I mean, that's what I hope for London, but that's different to what would actually happen in London, because I've been here for 10 years and I know how government works and systems work and culture works, mentality works, but I've been working with Rory for years now, so he knows that I'm always preaching international ideas, different ways of thinking. It just, like you said, 20 minutes ago, well, whatever, more like 2 minutes ago, it takes the UK just a lot longer to adapt to these global, international ideas. And the truth is, 75% of this world is going to live in a city within the next 30 years, so we have to go vertically. This isn't a choice. This is a need. Elastic cities, spaces need to change, all this stuff. But in short, instead of going into this long, this long explanation by why it's not the future, I was just gonna say no. Yeah. But I have a lot more to say about that. I just don't think we have enough time in this talk.
Well, in that case, I guess you, when we talk about designing a space, you said before that you really need to start with the consumer. So what does that look like, therefore? Okay, so I think the majority out here are designers, interior designers, right? Maybe. So I'm going to answer the question towards you guys. So Melissa just asked me, how do we design spaces towards the user, and why is that important? And I 1000% think that we are at a time right now where because of technology being so prolific, we've been able to create transparencies that allows users to have a much greater voice than we've ever had before. So if you look at social media, if you look at anything, all of a sudden Joe Schmo has become famous because she's got 1,000 followers, whatever, 100,000 followers, maybe she bought them, whatever. And all I'm saying is that influence right now is incredibly powerful, and it's changing everything in the real estate world. It's changing length of leases. It's changing everything. And so technology is really propagating the speed and transparency. So how do we as designers keep up with that is we have, we've got a lot of intuition. We're very plugged in. We're also on social media too, so we can kind of see what people are, what they like and what they're geared towards. But also I think that it's our opportunity to make suggestions to developers who aren't living, let's say, at a capped rent of $1,000 a month and don't really understand what users actually need,
And maybe we're a little bit younger or a little bit closer to those scenarios, or maybe our colleagues we work with live in those scenarios, and we can see how they like to bike to work, how they like to change when they get there. I don't know, I'm just making it up. How they like to have a coffee here or whatever. So I'm always suggesting stuff to the people that I work with. And if you think about you as a designer, you have to use your intuition to think about what people want. You have to pitch that to a developer who probably is fancy and lives in a big house and hasn't done his or her laundry in years, And you have to suggest these things because at the end of the day, if they're trying to rent and the market better than they do, we have to use our sensibilities to kind of guide and toggle what we put into design. But more importantly than that, brand is huge right now. You can't just have a property. It has to be called White Collar Factory or some factory or whatever. And it's our job to define what that brand is. So we put in the color schemes, we put in the look, the feel, the font, whatever. So that's kind of where we've seen the most growth in our practice.
And I guess that would be sort of the reason that home views exist. So do you see this firsthand, people sort of leaving reviews about property and changes actually happening off the back?
Yeah, I mean, the best example of that is Get Living are a big build-to-rent landlord in London. They own the East Village, which was the Olympic Village for the athletes right next to Stratford. It's now 1,500 units let on a constant basis. We went in, we did a customer satisfaction survey. They left reviews you can read publicly. In general, the feedback's fantastic. One thing they said that came up time and time again was there's no glass recycling on site. 2 weeks later, there was glass recycling on site. And just that reaction, I mean, social media's completely changed the transparency in real estate development. I think in the UK, house building and property development has always struggled with transparency. I don't think necessarily out of choice. There just hasn't been a platform for it. We recognise that, hence creating Home Views. And you would read a review about everything you do, whether it's buying a car, whether it's going out for dinner, whether it's, taking a weekend in a hotel. So why wouldn't you for where you live? And actually what people share when it's their home is really insightful. They're not used to being asked, what's working, what's not, what would you like to see? And I think that this is, it's a great thing. It's, technology is scary on the one hand, but it offers so much opportunity from a design and development point of view on the other hand as well.
Yeah, I think that because of technology and transparency, I think our job in a way is actually getting easier or more creative, because it allows us to have a voice with developers, to encourage them to move towards a certain different path that they were initially going to think about, and allows us to be more creative in our jobs. And I think that's quite exciting from where I'm coming from.
And, obviously there are luxuries in property development and the rental market. And I know that you also work with owners as well. But for the really, really high end, Nicolas, this is for you. What is luxury when it comes to property development in high end residential?
We had that discussion a bit earlier. I think it's the same. I think luxury for our clients, and I think for most of the clients, is really getting something which is unique and personal to them. So it's really starting with the clients, understanding what they want, understand how they live, and really trying to tailor something that will connect with them more personally, as opposed to trying to have a design which is a little bit more flashy, and people don't really want that anymore. So I think for developers it's quite complicated, because there's always that balance between, should I finish my development completely so people can see exactly what it's going to look like, but in the same way they know that the person purchasing that development or that apartment will want to redo it to match his personal taste. So there's always a bit of that conflict at the moment in development, how much we should finish, how much we should live.
I've been in so many conversations with developers about that, where you're fitting out a flat with a base spec across the whole development, but there's 200 units and they range from £1 million to £5 million. And the amount of people that buy at the higher end of the market then rip everything out and put their own stamp on it.
I was just going to say how many we've walked into to then rip everything out for them and start again, even when it was furnished as well.
Ironically,
one of the key jobs we do.
the risk of not doing it is then they complete as a shell, and so it happens all the time. It's a shame.
And I guess anyone else on what, because I know that I asked you, a few of you, about what you actually think luxury in residential is today. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Because I feel that luxury used to be good design, and that seems to now just be a standard. So what has taken the place?
I think we've kind of touched on it already to a degree, but I think luxury is bespoke and curated space, whether that is from space planning or from the outset or to the design at the end. It's very much about that particular client and the needs of the people that are buying into that space. And on the other side is, like you said, Rory, building the communities and the culture and the food kind of service around. It's really kind of creating a boutique hotel, 5-star service to the people that live in there. So a combination of two for me.
And Dara, you, as you mentioned, you split your time 50-50 between Hong Kong and London. And you said something really interesting to me, which was, as technology gets better, our arm's reach gets further. How has sort of embracing globalization as an individual impacted the way that you design and the way that, I guess, you conduct business?
Ooh. Okay, that's a very loaded question. How has technology changed the way that I design?
Yeah.
Well, I guess speaking to designers, obviously the more we travel and the more we immerse ourselves into different cultures and different experiences and different, settings, we get inspired by everything, right? Like, I'm in New York, I walk by a Nike store, I'm like, wow, look at what they're doing. I go see a resi development, and I'm like, look at the construction, look at what they're doing. Like, because it's not just about, like, we're thinking like wall finishes and whatever. It's not just about the look of it, it's how people are using it. And every culture is gonna use it different. So actually, when you travel, you start to think like, they're putting bathtubs by the window. Like, what, we were like scared of being seen naked, and there they see it as voyeurism. And that's a bad example, but I'm just saying, like, I think the more you travel and the more you can immerse yourselves in the way people are eating, dining, living, working, you can really get inspired. Oh my God, I just came back from Singapore 2 weeks ago. And if you haven't been to Singapore, please go. It is like what I picture a city 20 years from now. There's like plants all over the building, and there's it's all about sustainability. And also Shenzhen, it is the first future city that's all about technology. They use their faces to withdraw money from the ATM, I'm just saying that so much comes from travel. It doesn't have to be a global city. You could go to Calcutta or whatever and watch the way people are carrying water, for instance. But I am constantly inspired by travel. I'm constantly inspired by the way people live, work, and eat. And I constantly feed those ideas right back into London, if they'll listen. If they won't, Asia. I'm just kidding. Constantly, there is a lot of globalism happening right now. So it is kind of nice to learn off of each other. And I was just at the Milken Institute, which is this like global conference in Singapore. And they said, we have different systems, but we're one world. And I thought that was really a nice idea, because there's so much going on right now where we forget that we're on the same planet. So in a way, it's like everything we do reverberates off each other, and we are one. There's not like this against that, or governments against governments. It's like we're actually one globe.
Yeah, and I actually, Nicolas, we spoke about this a little bit as well, and you said that it used to, I guess, culture and where you were from used to really influence the designs that you would create, but you're seeing that less and less.
Yeah. Before. Because we work with a lot of different nationality in terms of clients, you could sort of guess what they might expect based on nationality, because they're, if it's Russian, Middle East, or European, they have slightly a different way of living, I would say. But now it's a bit different, because they all have been educated maybe in the States or in Europe, and they might coming from Kazakhstan or whatever. So it's much more, as I said, based on their education, where they lived, where they experience, as opposed to their nationality will mean that they need to live that way or that way. So we need to be very careful about approaching that per nationality, and it's more about the persons, what they want, how they live, how many people is going to live in the properties, how long they're going to stay there, do they have staff, no staff, and sort of really walk through them how they live in order to design something that functionally works for them as well. Yeah.
And I guess going back to function a little bit, you spoke about this earlier. Can you explain, because you told me that function was, you felt very important and one of the most important things in designing a space, but you work in high-end luxury, so can you explain the importance of function despite having sort of all the space in the world to play with?
Yeah. So function is first to sort of depend on how big is the family that living in that property plus any sort of service around that. I think it's that's the first part, is making sure that they've got maybe the private family will stay in a different place and the staff will sort of be able to service the property without being sort of in connection with the family. So there are different things in terms of function in that sense, but I found that before design was more important, and we were talking more about design when engaging with the clients. Now the function aspect of how they're going to use the property, the maintenance of that property and making sure that what we use is going to be durable and it's going to be able to stay the way we've designed it for a number of years, becoming almost more important than the look of it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, we see that too, that design is almost becoming secondary. You first figure out what's the functionality of the space, how is the family going to live there, how is the tenant going to live there, and then we only move to the design much later, and it's done much quicker as well.
And Dara and Petra, you both dress a lot of residential spaces for property developers, and I guess have experience in those sort of design, sort of immersive environments, I guess. Petra, you recently finished the Maker's Apartment, so I was hoping that you could share what that is and why concepts like the Maker's Apartment are becoming increasingly important in real estate.
Sure. So we've dressed a show apartment for Pocket Living for their development in Bolo Lane, which is in Chiswick. Claire was one of my team members who's looked after that project, and we came up with a concept that, and working for Pocket Living, they are quite a progressive, forward-thinking developer that really is quite agile in the way they work, and they are able to take new concepts quite easily from us. So we came up with a plan to try to engage the local community. We've done one show apartment already, and we wanted to do something different. So we wanted to engage the local community. So we went to search within the local community, searched quite long and hard, right, Claire? Looking for makers, artisans, art galleries, and any sort of craftsman in the area that could help us and lend the piece to curate this space. Of course, we couldn't find everything around West London, so we had to expand our search in a wider UK. But at the end, we ended up with about 60 makers that lend us pieces in there and created a beautiful home. And hopefully, the intention was to really bring the craftsmanship back into a home rather than away from the gallery, if it makes sense, but kind of create a home with craftsmen and artisan pieces to make it a lot more approachable and warm. The result is pretty good. I think we had a pretty nice response, but I think that the nicest part about the project was that if you think about the sweat and tears and emotions and stories behind each piece, and obviously amplified by 60 people in there, I think the experience is very rich, and when you walk in, you really can feel that kind of beautiful energy of the pieces that are working together in a home. So I think in terms of story and a brand, obviously links very well with Pocket because they're trying to attract local communities, millennials, younger couples or individuals or professionals who are trying to get onto the property market, and it links that very well with their values and the values of the buyer. So therefore it kind of creates a synergy all around the space and takes away the traditional show apartment that's quite stale and boring to give it like a deeper meaning and deeper value to the purchasers when they walk through. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And Rory, I think you're in a unique place to sort of talk about how all of these luxuries and amenities actually affect the value of real estate. From your view of home views that you have, do you think that all of these amenities, all of the sort of add-ons that we've spoken about, does that affect the price of real estate?
Well, I think going back to what I said, like London being quite far behind the global standard, every developer in London became obsessed with amenities, particularly in big regeneration projects. So if you look in somewhere like Nine Elms, which is Battersea Power Station, where the American Embassy is relocated, every single building there has a pool, a gym, a spa, a residence lounge, a cinema, a private kitchen, a private dining room, and it looked great on paper. The reality is every owner in those apartment blocks now pay a service charge, which can be thousands of pounds a year, which you can't discount against your rent.
And the sad thing is that those spaces are empty.
Yeah, a lot of them are. I mean,
lot of them are
I would say from our experience, actually, there's a lot of tenants in those buildings now. And actually, I went down to Battersea Power Station the other day, and there is a bit of a buzz there, finally. But I think going back to what does facilities add value? It does if you're not paying for it. And I think that's a reality for owners, is that one of their first questions and one of the big complaints on our site is that I bought this off plan 4 years ago, and I'm now spending, £12,000 a year to service a 2-bedroom flat that's got a concierge, a gym, and a spa that I never use. And even if you rent it out, you're paying for that. So I think going back to what you said about functionality, efficiency, paring things back, not only is it the new luxury, but it's what people want in every marketplace. Whether you're spending £1,000 a month on rent or £25 million on an apartment, it's just being efficient with what you do with your life day to day, and not having just all of this stuff for the sake of it. So and you can read the reviews on any scheme in London that's got every amenity under the sun, and 9 times out of 10 that's the feedback from an owner.
Okay, so that was all the questions that I had. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists on any of the subjects that we've spoken about? Thanks.
Can you tell in one word, all of you, what would be the selling point for a millennials for a property?
I'd say culture or community and value. And there's 3 words now.
You stole all 3 of mine.
I say flexibility. Because, the problem, well, I'm not going to say just with millennials, is they're cash short. They want a lot of things now. And they want a more balanced lifestyle. So that does include traveling and moving and working from home and all that other stuff, right? This is like ideally millennials, the newbies. I am a millennial, but I mean the really young ones coming up. So there are a lot of people that are moving towards this. Not so much in the UK, but like Jeff Bezos in the US has built Saunders, which is based on a live-work platform. So it takes office buildings and puts residential floors in there. I'm actually working on one in Texas right now. And what happens with that as the asset owner is the blended value of live and work creates a higher value for the building. So there's really good things about bringing in different asset classes. So basically, with technology and millennials, there's all these new asset classes coming into play in real estate that never existed before. And this is to answer what millennials want. And this is them guessing, or maybe they're taking all the data they gather from Amazon, God knows, and creating these spaces. So our jobs are never going to get more boring. They're going to become more exciting. And we've seen a huge rise in having to design spaces because empty buildings with no brands and without all that design simply aren't leasing the way they used to before, all of this stuff. So I think flexibility is one of them. Oh, so Airbnb, they asked the founder, what would you do next? And he said, look at 3 to 6 months rent. So right now we've got these 1-year tie-ins. And then what's the next best alternative? Well, nothing. You have 1-year tie-ins. So I think they're kind of thinking more like people are a little bit more global, or they're traveling, or, you know, a lot of jobs, including mine, is multi-city. And I still want a home when I land in Hong Kong, you know, and I still want one when I'm in London. So how do we answer these things? So maybe flexibility.
Yeah, I think that was quite good. I will definitely agree. Because I also think, yeah, people will spend more and more time at home as well. They will be working, they'll be relaxing at home, they entertain at home, they will be shopping from home, they'll do everything from home. So that flexibility element is becoming very important at any level of the market, I would say.
Does anyone have any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, you were saying that we were going from more design-based to functionality. How do you think that the design industry is adapting to that change?
Can I answer that? I'm not from a designer point of view. I always had to in my previous job, I ran a new homes business, and that's where I got the chance to work with all these wonderful designers here. But the key, it was actually the legislation that puts handcuffs on creativity. So whether it's planning, building regs, and costs as well. I mean, the very simple thing I mentioned, like storage as an example, I think every single design of a one-bedroom flat I ever saw, to really design a one-bedroom flat well, you need a certain amount of square footage with a certain uniform. And if you don't have that, something's always going to get compromised. And the first thing to get compromised was storage, because you don't really think about it before you move in. So I think it's... I don't know how you deal with it, but I do think, you know, these guys have their hands tied behind their back in a lot of cases, and whether it's a developer looking at cost or legislation that really limits your flexibility on how you design a space, it's really tricky to do that. So how do you deal with that?
We're working on a project that's kind of starting, it's at the funding now, and we had a privilege to be involved in it from the start. So instead of hiring the architects, no disrespect to the architects in the room, they wanted to engage interior designer to kind of throw the plan into the air and see how we can rethink every single piece in the apartment, everything from the flooring to the ceiling to the walls, and what can go and what has to stay, and how do we maximize the space for the storage and for the practicality of that space without increasing the size. If anything, we wanted to decrease the size of the space. So I would say creative thinking and just brainstorming and traveling, you know, going to hotels or looking at the yacht design or other smaller creative spaces. Like Japan's great at that. It's been great, and probably Singapore and Hong Kong as well. And I think a lot of that just never has been used here. So every apartment we go into, it's almost like an exactly the same formula. You have a hallway, you have a bedroom that's exactly the same, master bedroom tiny bit bigger. There's no creative planning involved in that space. So it's quite nice to be there from the start as an interior designer who can then plan the living in that space better. I think architects, from what I've seen, tend to do very much cut and paste kind of method, which really isn't suitable for interior design, I would say, because there's so many better ways and better creative ways to come up with the storage, but once it's built, it's kind of too late.
Yes, No, I agree with what both of them are saying, but I guess maybe thinking of it in commercial spaces as well. Right now, functionality in spaces, especially urban spaces, because we're in London right now, is changing in a way where it's usually multi-function space, because people are thinking about how to maximize revenue in the same space. So it might turn into an event space, or it could be a lobby that then is, you know what I mean? That it's also a coffee space, that's also a reception space, that's also a So in a way, a lot of the times when we design, and as we know and have known for 10 years, hotel and resi and office are all kind of blending into the same desire, which is a place that's comfortable and well designed and has a nice ambience and has good lighting that can change for the different functions that happens in that space, right? So you can have ambient mood lighting in the evening and then like really great lighting for working in the daytime. So like as designers, like I'm constantly having to think about, like if we're doing a hotel, how can the lobby perform in many different functions? So function doesn't always have to be a static thing. It can be a dynamic thing. And then it's really up to us how to think about modular furniture and like curtains that creates room separation and how to buffer the sound. And like, you know, we were saying how right now we're in a time where service and operations is playing a really big role in how places are operated and the services they provide and the brands that they build and the community that they draw. So I think it's a huge time for designers right now because it's really up to us to then govern and design how that's all like played out. We're like, God, like, you know, like you exercise here, you do that. And then it turns into a workplace during the afternoon. And it's really a conversation between you, the client, the developer, whatever, the fund, the architects, how to make places function in a really efficient way. And it's funny because Petra was just saying how spaces are becoming smaller. Yes, I'm seeing that too. I was just in Singapore and I was at their copy of Citizen M. So it's called like the M Hotel. And you now walk into these hotel rooms where like everything you need is in this like micro box, you know what I mean? So I think that, you know, as we go forward and as space gets more scarce, you're gonna see probably tighter spaces and also multifunctional spaces going forward. So yeah, it's a big role for us. I think we have to just keep designing.
Any other questions? No? Well, I will volunteer the panel to stick around for a few more minutes. So if you have a question but you didn't want to ask it to the group, feel free to pop up and say hello. Thank you so much to our panel. That was really lovely.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you to everyone for coming to the talk. Enjoy the rest of your time at DecoRex.